Um, okay, so welcome to our parents and our family members that are here not as parents, but just here to learn. We have a special guest with us tonight, Melissa Yelito of My Advocacy. She's going to introduce herself in a moment. But I know that a lot of you that registered are maybe not familiar with us yet, myself or the collective. So I just want to tell you a little bit about that. This is the first time we've opened up our expert chats to the public. So I just wanted to fill you guys in. So I'm just a frustrated mom who's been on a very prolonged and agonizing journey for my now 13-year-old. But we started mentioning to school that something was up and he needed help way back in first grade. There were actually signs in preschool that probably should have been red flags to teachers, but we kind of just, we didn't know it. We didn't know what we didn't know, right? So we kind of trusted this school. They said, oh, he's just young, wait and see. He's not a behavior problem. He's good, he's quiet. And that worked for maybe first and second grade. And then in third grade, I got a little louder. And I won't regale you with the whole story, but just now in seventh grade, we finally got the school to do a new evaluation. We didn't agree with it. We got them to cover an IEE. And of course, the IEE showed all the diagnoses that I've suspected all this time that have been overlooked and were observable. So now they are saying, oh, yes, he needs an IEP. And we do have our meeting coming up later this month, which at first felt like a victory. And I did let it feel like a victory for a little while, but now I'm just angry again that this didn't happen sooner. So basically, I've been channeling all of my guilt and anger and frustration into this project that we call the Confident Parenting Collective, where I'm bringing together all the amazing local resources that we have available to us that families may not know about. And a directory of providers, because lots of families are sitting on wait lists for evaluations, diagnoses, treatment, and all these providers have availability. So if you're not familiar with the collective, be sure to stop by. I'll just share my screen for a second so everybody knows where to go. The URL is specialneedscollective.com, and this presentation tonight will be put up in our learning library under the category of videos, where all of our past expert lives exist as well. So really great free resources for families. So I hope that this is going to be really helpful. My mission is to get families the information they need just a lot sooner. Hopefully even before they know they need it. So if that's you, I am glad that you are here. If you're here live and you have questions, pop them in the chat. We'll get to them either throughout or at the end. And with that, I will turn it over to Melissa. Thank you so much for giving generously of your time and your knowledge tonight. First, tell us who you are and what you do, and then we'll sit back and learn.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me and for everything that you're doing. The collective is an awesome, amazing resource for families in our community. I'm very happy to be a part of it and to be here tonight just to share a little bit about what I do in the context of how parents can kind of advocate for their kids. So my slogan is educate, advocate, empower. So while advocacy is at the center of what I do, I really strive to educate the families that I work with and empower them to be, they are their child's best advocate. You are the expert on your child. You have known them their whole life. And so you are a valuable member of the IEP team. It may not feel that way sometimes, but my job is to kind of support you. I always tell families, the more you can kind of build your support system, the more effective you're going to be on the IEP team. So with that, before I start talking, I just want to kind of hear a little bit from those of you that are here live. If you could throw in the chat your child or children's age and grade and what school district you are, if you're comfortable, just to kind of give me some context as I'm talking, so I can kind of tailor it to you guys.
Do you want me to say it in the chat, or is it?
It doesn't matter. You can talk.
Katie, I'm not sure, you're probably the only person in here, but I'm not a parent, but I work with a ton of parents and kids. I'm a marriage and family therapist who works with families in Chester County at Pediatric Psychology Center. So I'm dealing with Chester County schools, but actually the biggest issues I've been having lately have been with Twin Valley. Oh, it's in Allentown. What's the school's name? Shoot. Oh, Parkland, which is really surprising. And then had some issues with Downingtown East and West, mainly West. But Twin Valley and Parkland have been the big ones.
So my daughter Eleanor will be starting kindergarten in the fall. She currently has an IEP, so we're starting this whole process of getting into the school district. We're in Bucks County and Centennial School District, so I'm flying blind. I have no idea what we're doing.
Well, I do have some information about that transition process from early intervention to school age, so we will get to that.
And I have to imagine that having her already identified is going to be really our problem is the identification.
I feel like
that's got to be a benefit.
All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing. I'm going to share my screen, hopefully. All right. Can you guys see my presentation? Okay, great. So my name is Melissa Yelito. I'm the owner of My Advocacy LLC. I am a former teacher. I taught for 7 years. I started out in the Baltimore City public school system and then moved up to Pennsylvania. And I was in the Downingtown area school district for 5 years before I had my 2 kids. So I'm a parent too. Took a hiatus from the classroom and kind of have gotten into advocacy and found that, you know, a lot of my frustration in teaching was that I was an elementary teacher for most of my career, and I had the kids all day, and I saw the need for the services and the supports, and I would go to meetings and I would fight for it, and I just was met with resistance, similar to, I'm sure, a lot of your experience. So, you know, I've really enjoyed kind of taking a different role at the IEP table as an advocate and supporting families and getting their kids the supports and services that they need. I'm also a youth mental health first aid trainer. So I do training for Chester County in youth mental health first aid. If you've never heard of it, it's a wonderful program. It's free. Definitely look into it. There's virtual and in-person trainings in the area, but anyways, that's my little spiel about that. You guys are here to hear all about special education. So we will get into first eligibility for special education services, and then we'll talk a bit about evaluations, the different types of evaluations. Erica had mentioned, you know, the school evaluated and she wasn't in agreement. And so we'll talk about what you could do if that happens. Then we'll get into terms, special ed, a little bit of special ed law, and some timelines for the IEP process, talk a little bit about educational placement, and then end with some tips and tricks. And I do have a resource document to share with you all. If you have questions while I'm talking, go ahead and throw them in the chat. Erica's going to be monitoring that. And I'll either answer while I'm talking, or we'll get to probably the majority of the questions at the end. So first thing, disability categories. So IDEA identifies 13 disabilities that a student could qualify for. So autism, deafblindness, deafness, emotional disturbance, hearing impairment, and intellectual disability, multiple disabilities, an orthopedic impairment, other health impairment, specific learning disability, speech or language impairment, traumatic brain injury, or a visual impairment. So a child can qualify for one or more than one of these disabilities. And then the other piece that qualifies them for special education services is the need for specially designed instruction. So that really is the key piece. They have to meet the criteria for at least one of the disability categories, and they have to show a need for specially designed instruction. A big question that I get sometimes is, my child has a medical diagnosis of autism. The school is not accepting this diagnosis. So there's a difference between a medical diagnosis and an educational diagnosis. So a child could meet the eligibility criteria for a medical diagnosis of autism or a medical diagnosis of ADHD, but they may or may not meet the criteria for the educational disability of autism or other health impairment, is kind of what ADHD would fall under. Or sometimes they don't have the medical diagnosis, but they have the educational diagnosis. So it's kind of a separation. And I'll get into that a little bit later when I talk about outside providers and their reports and the school's responsibility with that information, but just kind of a little important thing to note there. So if a child does not qualify for an IEP, so if they have a disability, but they are not in need of specially designed instruction, they would qualify for a 504 plan and receive some services through that plan. So that would be accommodations so that they could access the building or the environment. So for example, if a child has a diagnosis of ADHD but doesn't meet the criteria for other health impairment, they may need extended time. They may need breaks. They may need like shortening the length of the assignments that they are doing. That is possible through a 504 plan. The biggest difference between an IEP and a 504 is the specially designed instruction. So evaluations, the educational evaluation is going to determine, one, if the child meets the criteria for the disability and the special education services. It's also going to identify if there's a need for instruction, services, or supports. So when I receive students' documents, the first thing I look at is the evaluation. The evaluation really drives the development of the IEP. If there's a need identified in the evaluation, it needs to be addressed in a goal or specially designed instruction somewhere in the IEP. If it is not being addressed, that's a red flag, and I would be asking some questions about that. So I always look in the evaluation report after reading it in full, the needs towards the end, and I'll try to match up when I go through the IEP and just make sure all their needs are being met somewhere within their plan. Before the evaluation happens, parents will receive a permission to evaluate, or if the child is already identified, it's called a permission to reevaluate. If you have been fighting to even get an evaluation, you're probably so excited once you receive this form, because that means the school district has agreed to complete the evaluation. And sometimes what happens is parents will sign the form without fully reading it. There's a lot of information. It's usually a few pages. And you're just so excited to get the evaluation that you sign it and send it back. The biggest thing that I would recommend doing when you receive this is to read through the section where they list the types of assessments that they intend to give your child. And make sure that all of your concerns, there's an assessment for that. So if you're concerned about executive functioning, what are they doing to investigate that? If you're concerned about, reading skills, writing, math, making sure that there is an assessment for that. If you have behavior concerns, you would want to see a functional behavior assessment on there. So this is kind of your chance, because once you've signed that, you've given consent for the evaluation and they'll move forward. So if there's something on that list that you either don't agree with or there's something missing, then that's the opportunity to kind of have that conversation with the team before signing the form. When you do sign the form, the school has 60 calendar days from the date that you sign and return it to them to complete the evaluation. The interesting thing about summer vacation is that it counts as one calendar day. So we're kind of getting to the point in the school year where if a family hasn't received the permission to evaluate or reevaluate, right now, I think it will still happen this school year. But I think there's another week or two, and if it's issued after then, it's going to come back next school year. So I try to keep that in mind for clients that have evaluations coming up towards the end of the year, and making sure that that form's being sent out and that they're signing and returning it to give enough time so that the evaluation can be completed and then the team can meet to plan for the next school year. So what if the district refuses to complete an initial evaluation? I've heard a lot lately, districts saying, well, their grades are good. I don't think we need to do an evaluation right now. They're not going to qualify because they're doing well academically. Doing well academically doesn't necessarily mean that there is not a disability that needs specially designed instruction. So the tip I like to give for that when they say that, probably verbally, not in writing, if they're refusing to complete the evaluation, if they want to collect data, sometimes they want to collect data for 6 weeks and then check in and see. I would just request that they provide you with prior written notice. It's a form, and they need to document your request, whether they are approving it or denying it. And if they're denying your request, they need to justify why. So that would be my recommendation, to kind of get that in writing. And that typically tends to kind of get things moving towards an initial evaluation. So once you receive, so the evaluation happens, you receive the evaluation. I would recommend requesting that you are sent the evaluation digitally before someone calls you to talk about it. So what I've heard from clients is that sometimes school districts will just, out of the blue, no heads up, call them and want to talk about this evaluation that the parents haven't read through. They're kind of getting blindsided. So if you get that phone call, you can respectfully ask that the report is sent to you and that you're given time to review it before you have a discussion about the findings. So when you receive that, my recommendations would be to read it multiple times. Go through, highlight, write, annotate any questions you have, anything that doesn't look right. If there's a different kid's name in the evaluation report, note that so you can talk to the team about it when you do meet. One thing that I like to do is I compare results from previous evaluations. So if your child was given a psychoeducational evaluation in 2017 and then 3 years later given the same psychoeducational evaluation, I like to compare side by side their scores, so that I can see if there's growth or if there's regression. Because if there's regression, then I am wondering if the programming is appropriate for the student, or was this just a bad day for them. Just kind of getting curious about those results, especially across the same assessment.
And Melissa, would you say that a lack of progression is technically regression? Like if it's been 3 years and they're still performing at the same?
It depends on the evaluation, because they're compared to peers that are their age at that time. Mm-hmm. So if, they're getting a score in 2017, say they're 5 and then they're 8, the kids that they're being compared to technically grew 3 years, and maybe they only grew 2, but maybe that's something that they're working on as an IEP goal. So just something to get curious about. I did have a client, it was working memory, I think, processing speed, something like that, where they really regressed. And it was a major concern of the family. And it was just a lack of action. There was nothing addressing that need, and the student really regressed. And then we were able to get them more supports and services. Just, you know.
And just before you go on, Liz has a good question that we should probably do now. When you spoke about getting a written refusal, she's asking, does it count if the special ed teacher sent an email to the parent explaining their refusal?
No, I would ask for the form. I would ask for the official form, and then it will go in the child's file. That's a good question.
I thought
That's
we'll
actually
do that
surprising that they, yeah, I would definitely ask for that specific form.
However, when we as parents are putting things in writing, putting it into an email does count.
Yes, yes.
Right. So that can be confusing. Okay.
Yes. So as you know, Erica, I don't know if you you could probably talk all about this slide, independent educational evaluations. So if your child was evaluated and you don't agree with the results, or you don't agree with the results of a certain test, maybe they were given like academic achievement, speech, OT, PT, and you really disagree with what the speech eval came back with, you have the right to request an independent educational evaluation for every evaluation that's completed by the school. And so what you would need to do is put in writing that you disagree with either the entire evaluation or, you know, specific parts of it. You need to, in that letter, explain why you are disagreeing. So you could disagree because it was incomplete or used outdated methods. Recommend something that you're in disagreement with, or lacks important information needed to ensure that their IEP is meeting their needs. Usually it's the second or the third that you would be disagreeing with. So you would put this in writing, and really the school has two options. They can agree to the IEE, or they can move forward with due process. And then, you know, go through and build their case and argue why they feel their evaluation was appropriate. And an important thing to note about IEEs is the school district will sometimes provide you with a list of professionals that they could, you know, that they recommend using, that they've worked with in the past, not that they are employed by the school district, but just people that they recommend. You are not required to use them. It just needs to be a credentialed professional, but the school does have to approve that credentialed professional. So if you want to use somebody that's not on that list, you would go back to the team and say, hey, I'd really like so-and-so to do this evaluation. Here's their, you know, their credentials, their information, and then the school would approve it. And then I talked a little bit about this before, private evaluations and district responsibility. So these are like the CHOP evaluations, outside services, wraparound services. They, you know, your child may have evaluations that are completed by, you know, separate from the school. And all of this is really important information. But unfortunately, the school only needs to consider this. So it could help determine if additional school-based testing is needed. So for example, if your child recently got the medical diagnosis of ADHD, this is important information. I would encourage you to share it with the school team, share the report if you're comfortable. This may just trigger a reevaluation. They might want to look at, you know, doing some rating skills to see if the ADHD is impacting their ability to access their education. It could also provide important background information about their history with, you know, previous providers or services that they previously received or are currently receiving. And then outside diagnoses are not eligible for an educational diagnosis. They can be documented in the present levels. So if your child is diagnosed with ADHD, the school does their rating scales. They're finding that the ADHD while it's a medical diagnosis, it's not impacting their ability to access their education. I always ask that it's documented in the present levels. Can you please say that you received the report from CHOP stating that on this date, my child was diagnosed with this. They're receiving these outside services. At this time, they don't qualify for the educational disability. And that way, just the IEP, when it moves from year to year and the next teacher gets that document, they'll be able to see. They weren't on the IEP team when this conversation happened, but now they see, oh, okay, well, in the present levels, they have a history of this, this, and this. While it's not currently impacting their needs, it's really good information to have. A little bit about special education law. So IDEA really drives special education, essentially. So the purpose of IDEA is to ensure that all children with disabilities have available to them a free and appropriate public education, so FAPE. And that emphasizes special education and related services designed to meet their unique needs and prepare them for further education, employment, and independent living. So if your child is transition age or nearing transition age, those are really the three goals of transition services. They're looking at further education, employment, and independent living skills. And so while that may not be on the forefront of your kindergartner, maybe you're looking at those independent living skills that a kindergartner may need, dressing themselves, things like that. So the other thing that I already kind of mentioned, FAPE, free and appropriate public education. So special education and related services that are provided at public expense, that's the big piece, that meet state standards, are appropriate, and are provided in conformity with an IEP. I always tell families to remove best from their vocabulary and replace it with appropriate. So in 1982, the US Supreme Court decided that a child with a disability is unfortunately not entitled to the best education, nor to an education that maximizes their potential. They're entitled to a free and appropriate public education. So when you're fighting for your child's needs, say, is this appropriate? What would an appropriate program look like for them given their needs? That's just a really good tip. Procedural safeguards notice. I'm sure if you have a child that has been receiving special education services for more than a few years, you could probably wallpaper your house with this document. It's huge. When I was teaching, we had a teacher retire, and some of the other teachers made her a wreath out of the procedural safeguards notice. So multiple uses for it, but really it's an important document. It outlines your rights as a parent of a child receiving special education services, the right to an independent educational evaluation, the right to examine records, and the right to request mediation and due process should you disagree. So moving right into that, mediation. So mediation is a procedural safeguard. It's used to resolve disagreements between parents and schools. The important piece about mediation is that it must be voluntary. So a parent could request mediation and the school could decline and mediation doesn't happen, or vice versa. The school wants to go to mediation, the parent disagrees, they want to move to due process. So it must be voluntary. It cannot be used by the school to deny or delay the right to a due process hearing. And then it must be conducted by a qualified and impartial mediator. So it would be organized by the Office of Dispute Resolution. So it would be an impartial mediator. and they would meet with the parents, they would meet with the school, and then they would meet with you together. And really the goal is to find an agreeable plan moving forward. Mediation can be very effective, but sometimes it may not be. And you may still have concerns or feel that, you know, you don't agree with the outcome. You have the right to file for due process, which is also another procedural safeguard. It's an administrative hearing before an impartial hearing officer or judge. And then throughout the due process proceedings, mediation remains available. So if you go to due process, you have the choice to move back to mediation if you feel that would better suit your needs. You do not need to retain an attorney, but the school district is allowed to and will. So I would highly, highly recommend, if you're going to due process, you would retain an attorney. Mediation, you can bring an attorney. If you bring an attorney to mediation, the school district can bring an attorney to mediation. You could also bring an advocate to mediation. That would highly recommend retaining an attorney if you're moving towards due process. Special education timelines. So a few things. Schools must reevaluate at least every 3 years. If the child has an intellectual disability, they must reevaluate every 2 years. Early intervention, ages 3 to 5, they reevaluate every 2 years. But school age, unless you have an intellectual disability, they will reevaluate every 3 years. But if you're a year and a half in, if you're 2 years in, you have new concerns, you can request an evaluation at any time in writing. And then the school would either agree to your request or give prior written notice explaining why they are denying your request. I would think that they would agree to your request, but you never know. So I always like to keep the prior written notice in my back pocket. Evaluations must be completed within 60 calendar days of signed parental consent. I am working with one family right now, and the district has, oh my gosh, the 60 days was up at the end of January, and we are now in April, and they have yet to find a provider to give the evaluation that we requested and signed a form for. So we have now moved to an IEE and found our own provider. So be aware of that timeline. If you're getting close to the 60 calendar days and you haven't heard from them, always a good idea to reach out and request that you're sent that document ahead of time. One of the other things, the IEP team must meet within 30 calendar days following an evaluation to create an IEP. So Erica, that's kind of what you're in the holding pattern for right now. So once the child's evaluated, the team then has 30 days to begin developing this IEP. Now, I would recommend that you request a draft in writing, that you receive the draft in advance. It's more of a courtesy. It's not required, but it's always good practice that they have a working draft in advance of the meeting. Obviously, the IEP is a fluid document. It could change. There are things that could be added. But I always like my families to go in prepared. So I would recommend that you request the draft and that you request that it be sent to you a day or two in advance of the meeting so that you have the appropriate amount of time to review it. If they are unwilling to send the draft, I would just recommend going to the meeting, hearing what they have to say, taking it all in, and then you decide, do I need another meeting to talk about my questions that came up after I process this, or am I okay with the plan going forward? The school team must implement the IEP within 10 days following the meeting.
All right, let me interrupt you, Melissa. So
Yes.
Just to clarify, if you feel like you don't understand or you haven't processed and you're at the meeting, or you just are like, maybe you just feel pressured, whatever, you don't have to decide, like finalize anything right then and there. You can say, I want to sit with this. You have time to sign too, just like they do.
Yes. And I would never recommend signing a NORAP at the meeting. Mainly because there's a lot that was discussed at the meeting and I need to see it in the IEP before I'm agreeing. Or, you know, if you discuss, and I think I get into this a little bit later, but if you discuss a different placement, I would like to see you tour that placement before you agree to send your child there, or get some more, at least get some more information instead of on the spot agreeing to this, signing it, because once you sign it, you've agreed.
Is there a timeline for a parent to return that form?
10 days.
10 days. Okay.
So once the NORAP is issued, so they could issue the NORAP a few days after the meeting, but at the top of the NORAP, it should say that the date that it was issued to you. And you want to make sure that that date is the correct date. And then, yes, you have 10 days. And that 10 days also applies to requesting due process and requesting mediation. So when you get the NAREP, you have the option to agree, you have the option to disagree and request an informal meeting, disagree and request mediation, and disagree and request due process. Just checking that box on the NAREP does not mean you have requested due process or mediation. You then need to call ODR and file for mediation or due process. So I have the forms linked in my resource document that I'll share towards the end of this. But that's a big thing to keep in mind. And you have to do that within 10 days too. You have to call ODR and request mediation or due process within that 10-day window. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Another timeline, the IEP team must meet to discuss extended school year determination by February 28th each year. I always recommend that you as a parent are keeping an eye on that. So ESY looks at a number of factors, but one of the biggest things is regression and recoupment. So do they regress over a break, and how long does it take for them to recoup those skills? So I would be taking my own data at home. What are they able to do before break? What are they able to do after break? And how long does it take to get them back to the point of where they were before break? And I would bring that up to the team when you have that discussion about ESY. Another little tidbit about ESY, and I know I'm kind of going rogue right now, but
and in case anyone doesn't know what ESY stands for,
extended school year. Yes, there are so many acronyms, and I just kind of, it's like second nature to me. But I have to kind of remember and bring myself back. So thank you. But yes, extended school year is just that, anything beyond the regular school year. So that could include tutoring after school hours, before school hours. That could include a placement not within the district's extended school year program. If it's not appropriate for their needs or is not addressing their goals, then the team has the responsibility to look at programs that can address those goals or those needs. Okay, and then the last thing, the IEP must be reviewed at least once per year at an annual IEP meeting. Something else to keep in mind, because I have had certain districts that go past this date. The IEP doesn't expire, so don't worry. You know, the meeting was supposed to happen on April 4th. It's not happening till April 6th. What happens between April 4th and April 6th? Well, the IEP will stay as is, the services will be implemented, but the school district is out of compliance, essentially. If it's not a matter of 2 days and longer than that and concerning, you can file a state complaint, you can reach out to a supervisor of special education or the director, and definitely make that known, because that is not, there should be a meeting at least once a year. And typically schools will schedule it before that 1 year mark, or you can request a meeting before that 1 year mark, but an annual meeting needs to happen at least once a year. Educational placement. So this is a big one. If your child's needs are not being met within their environment, the team needs to have a discussion about what is their least restrictive environment. So the important thing about this is the discussion about educational placement happens after the team has gone through and decided what supports and services are needed to make sure that this child is able to access their education. So what are their needs? What are their goals that have been developed? And what supports and services are needed to make adequate progress on those goals? You go through the goals, the specially designed instruction, the related services, and you finally get to educational placement. Where is the least restrictive environment for these services to be provided to this child? Is it a regular education classroom? Is it part-time in regular education, part-time in a pull-out special education class? Is it in an IU-based program? If the district or an IU-based program is not appropriate, you can look at approved private schools. So approved private schools are partially funded by the state of Pennsylvania because they are approved to provide a free and appropriate public education, and in that sense, implement IEP services. So the IEP would follow the student to that placement, and it will most likely be revised to reflect the new environment and the supports that it can provide. But they would have an IEP in that placement. Of a private school that is not an approved private school may require families to waive FAPE. So, you see this in settlement agreements. You would need to waive FAPE because private schools that are not an approved private school are not approved by the state to provide FAPE. So while there are some wonderful private schools that service special education students, you may have to waive FAPE to get your child placed there. And then they wouldn't have an IEP, but they could be receiving the supports and services that they need in that smaller group environment with the specialized curriculum or instruction that they're receiving. These schools can be private pay, so the family could pay for the placement themselves, or they can be funded through a settlement agreement or a contract between the district and that placement. So, I mean, Coatesville has a few contracts with private schools in the community that, provide certain services to their students that they cannot provide. And I know, Liz, you said Twin Valley. Twin Valley does have some contracts with private schools off the top of my head that I know of that can provide FAPE. So the IEP would follow the student there in that case. So biggest thing with educational placement is it's not one person's decision. If, the special education teacher thinks they belong here, but the parent disagrees, it needs to be a conversation. Placement is a team decision, and as a parent, you're a part of the IEP team, and in turn, a part of that decision. Now, sometimes it takes more than one meeting. Sometimes you're planting the seed. I don't know that so-and-so's needs are being met within this curriculum. Can we collect more data on that? Are there placements that can provide that service to my child so that they can make appropriate progress on this goal? At the end of the day, if you're at an impasse with the district about placement, they want them here, you disagree, you have the right to mediation and due process to kind of work through that disagreement. The NAREP, which I kind of spoke about already. So another acronym, Notice of Recommended Educational Placement. So the NAREP is issued following a meeting, and must be signed within 10 days, or the placement will go into effect unless it's an initial placement. That's kind of a loaded sentence. So if the NARP is issued and the school is proposing a different placement and you don't agree with it, but you don't sign the NARP, they can still be sent to that placement unless it's an initial evaluation and you're developing the IEP, or they're transitioning from early intervention to school age IEP. Then you would need to approve that for it to go into effect. Exactly what I said before, you have to request mediation or due process within that 10-day window. If you don't request it, then it can go into effect. The biggest part about mediation and due process is the stay put. So if you request mediation or due process, the student is going to stay in their last agreed upon placement. So if you're not agreeing with where they are, where they're going, and you request mediation or due process, they stay where they are with the services that they were receiving until the dispute is resolved. And like I said before, never sign a NORAP at an IEP meeting, and never sign a NORAP recommending a different placement. Never agree to that before you tour the placement, because it could sound really good. I mean, I've talked to placements over the phone. Wow, this program sounds like it would really be great for this student. They told me everything I wanted to hear. And then we went to see it, and oh boy, no, this is not the appropriate placement for that student. So again, sit on it, think about it, do your research, don't agree to anything right away.
And I just want to jump in, Melissa, from my own painful personal experience. When you're saying things like you have 10 days or whatever, it would be so nice if anyone from the school made you aware of that verbally. Maybe this was just my experience, but parents do not expect that anyone will tell you that. It will possibly be buried. I mean, buried in the paperwork that they bury you under. So for example, when I had 10 days to sign the NORAP, which I would have done, and I would have said that I disagreed, it was on the third email attachment. So of course you're going to open the first one and read that first, right? That's your kid's report that you've been waiting for months. And that is 30 something pages long. And by the time you're done reading it and you're upset, like this doesn't show anything, I never even opened the third attachment because I was like, oh, procedural safeguards. Yeah, whatever. So it was like on the third page of the third attachment, and it was in the only thing that was in teeny tiny letters that said that I had 10 days. Of course, I took issue with that. It was like, this can't possibly be how you guys meant to do this. This feels like a trick. And they were like, well, we sent it to you. You know, we don't know what to say. So just, yeah, definitely read everything. I know it's like 58 pages. You have to read them, or you have to find someone who can just translate it for you. And definitely look for the timeline that probably nobody will tell you.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. All right. Some tips following IEP meetings. I always recommend, I mean, beforehand, you can send your parental concerns. And those concerns can change at the meeting, after you've digested and thought about it. Send your parental concerns in writing following the meeting and ask that they be copy and pasted into the IEP. There's a parental concerns section, and they're going to write, there is no parental concerns if they are not explicitly told these are my parental concerns. And so you just want to make sure that that's documented, and they'll copy and paste it. So if you're concerned about a behavior that they're just kind of brushing under the rug, I would use that parental concern section to document your concerns and maybe the data you've taken that they haven't put in the IEP. I'm concerned about my child's recent increase in elopement behaviors. On this date, in this date, they eloped from the building. They missed X amount of instructional time. Put that in your parental concerns. It's going to go into the IEP, and they really don't have a say in that. So use that to your advantage. Continue to communicate concerns with the IEP team throughout the year. You know, maybe your child's doing really well and you really only need that annual meeting, but I'm sure things happen throughout the year. So make sure you're just, you know, building that relationship with the school team as well, and modeling, I guess, that open communication that you may not always receive on the other end. And if that is a problem, if you are not receiving any communication from your child's teachers, I would definitely recommend a homeschool communication log, something that kind of keeps you in the loop, keeps them in the loop, to really ensure that partnership. Review all IEP progress reports for meaningful growth on IEP goals. I just went to a meeting a month ago where somehow the IEP progress report was never sent out for the first marking period. And then the second marking period came, which is when I kind of came onto the team, and I asked for the IEP progress reports and the family didn't have them. And then they asked for them and they magically appeared in all of these documents now. And the child had made no growth on their goal, and there was no change to their programming. There was no additional supports put in place. And then we had to have a conversation about, you know, this child is not being successful with this expectation of them. Is this a appropriately ambitious goal, or do they need extra support? What's going on? Why have we waited until the end of the second marking period to say they're not making growth?
And is that something you'd want parents to see every marking period, did you say? A progress report?
Yes, it should come with their report card. Things have changed with like COVID. It used to go home on paper with the paper report card, but you know, some districts send things digitally now, and that was the issue with this student. Is it was supposed to be sent out digitally and it never went out. It wasn't in the IEP documents, and so it's a bit of a mess. Something to always look for. If you don't have it, request it. Regular education teachers do report cards, special education teachers do progress reports, and service providers, they do the progress reports. And that's where you can see, you know, how are they doing before a break too. That could be some data. And how are they doing after a break? Here's a resource list. I did send the PDF of my presentation to Erica that she can send out to everybody. But if you could do a quick QR code scan, or I can put the link in the chat once we're all done too. This is just a screenshot of the first page. There's some annotated documents that explain each part of all of the important documents: prior written notice, permission to reevaluate, a NOREP. That's where it'll kind of show you where it says that you have 10 days to sign this. So it kind of really breaks it down. I know that, you know, special education documents can be very overwhelming. They're very long and they have a bunch of acronyms. And, you know, those are good resources to have. Some ODR forms for mediation. Later on in the document, I linked the consult line, the special education consult line. If you haven't heard of it, it's wonderful. I call there sometimes just to kind of run something by someone else. Really, it's for parents, it's for teachers, it's for advocates. You call with a question about special education and they either have an answer for you or they find an answer for you. And then sometimes
you actually get a person.
yeah. And now what's new is, for a while you could just call in. Now you can fill out an online form, and I would recommend putting the time of day that works best for you, because there are times that they have just called me like 8 o'clock in the morning, not a good time in my house, trying to get the kids out the door. So say when you would like to be called back, and they're great. They'll call you like 3 days in a row and then kind of give up and you could submit another form. But they're wonderful and they'll send you resources. So if you have a question about something, they'll answer it and then they'll say, hey, I will email over this document that'll give you some more information about this. So just another great tool for your toolbox, along with some other things that I've linked. So that is everything I have. I'm happy to answer questions. I feel like I just talked at you guys.
No, that was great. I'm sure we're taking it all in. I took some awesome notes. Thank you so much. Yeah, parents, if you have to have questions, I'm sure. I mean, I can't speak for you, Melissa, but I'm assuming if someone has like a very specific question about their scenario, you'd be happy to delve into that as much as you can. I know it's hard to give like specifics, but yeah, if there's something you feel like you didn't get from tonight and you want to ask it, go for it. We'll see what Melissa can do.
Yeah.
While we're waiting for families to post their questions, I always hear like you're an equal at the IEP meeting. Having been in on so many, do you have any tips, even if it's just a pep talk? Like, it's very intimidating, especially if it's your first experience. Well, I've never been to an actual IEP meeting, right? I've been to many meetings. They were not IEP meetings. I guess they were considered 504 meetings, but same thing. It's like 8 representatives from the school and me on the other side of the table. So how do you, especially if you're not inherently like an aggressive, outspoken person, and aggressive is not the word I want to use, but you know what I mean? How do you feel and act like an equal in that scenario?
It can definitely, I mean, I can see as a parent myself, it can be so intimidating. I guess one thing I would say is, if you're thinking it, I bet you someone else working with that kid is also wondering this or thinking this or feeling this. As a teacher, there were so many times when I sided with the parent, but there's a supervisor at the meeting talking about the protocol for the district, and it just kind of, so you are a valuable member. You know your kid best, and there are no silly questions. Ask all of the questions. And something that I didn't mention in my presentation that I just thought of, especially after COVID, districts have moved to virtual meetings and they like to cap it at an hour. If you need longer than an hour, request a follow-up meeting. They can't, I mean, they will just say, okay, well, that's all the time we have. And then they'll like rush you off. And no, I wasn't done. All of my concerns weren't addressed. Request a follow-up meeting. Also, to that point, if you're in a meeting and you're uncomfortable, or you think you need to kind of put a pin in the discussion and you need to regroup, you can request that, the meeting stop and you reschedule at a time where maybe you want to bring an advocate, or you want to bring a family member, someone there to support you. That's always an option as well. So I hope that kind of answered your question. I went another way with it too, but
yeah. So Liz has a question. Liz, do you want to unmute and just ask it, or do you want me to read it? We're cozy here now. Go for it.
So I have a client I've been working with for a while who slowly but surely, come middle school, was having more executive functioning issues that I diagnosed with ADHD, and I recommended she get evaluated because a lot of them were with school. The school denied it. Fine. So parents just said, okay, we're going to take care of it ourselves. They got evaluated here. And once it was presented to the school, now they want to evaluate her. And that, to the best of my knowledge, they already did it last week. So that was a bit of a red flag to me. Do you have any recommendations for like what I can tell the family, like suggestions for them? Because I think she needs services, and I think that she it's because of her medical diagnosis. Any recommendations?
So I would be curious about what tests they were using to identify if there was a need in that area. So are they doing just rating scales? Are they doing observations? Another thing I like to see, you mentioned executive functioning. Sometimes districts will just give a rating scale and it's like the parent, this teacher, that teacher. That's not necessarily, I mean, that's just somebody's opinion.
Right.
I like to see like a certain subset given of an evaluation where they're actually doing a task, and that's how they're being evaluated in executive functioning. Because I mean, if you think about it, like a middle school, high school kid, they're in a class of what, 30 other kids. How is that teacher really understanding what's going on for this kid, what they're struggling with? So I hope that helps answer your question. I would just be curious about the type of testing that they're giving and making sure that they're looking at it in multiple ways.
And would
Okay,
the
that's what
process be the same, Melissa? Sorry, Liz, like if the school does their own testing and they say, we still disagree with your, now we've done this twice and we still disagree. The steps are the same, right? Mediation or due process, all the stuff you went through earlier.
Or an IEE where they request somebody else give the evaluation, because I'm assuming if you said the school did the testing last week, the parent probably signed off on whatever testing they recommended already. So depending on how it comes back, if they're saying it's not showing a need, I would possibly request an IEE and ask for certain tests to be given.
Okay, that's
Be
a
an
great.
option. Yeah.
And is the difference, so tell me if this is true or no. If a parent goes, let's use this scenario, the parents just went to, Liz, and got their own private evaluation, but the school was not involved with that. So they only have to consider it. They don't necessarily have to do anything about it. But now if this family requests an IEE that the school funds and it's a private provider, is there more weight than given to that? Like they have to do something with it, right?
There's more weight given. That they technically really only have to consider it, but there is more weight given to IEEs versus if a parent just on their own went out and got a private evaluation.
Okay. Yeah, I think that difference is important. And I just feel so strongly that not all evaluations are created equal. I mean, kind of like you just said, sometimes they're just looking at forms and opinions versus like evidence. But I think for my son, the huge difference was the school psychologist saw him one time for, I don't know, an hour, maybe it was 2 hours. I don't remember, in like a location he's never been. And, he's an actor, he's an acting school. And he has a lot of strengths. So he's going to lean on his strengths. He's going to act, he's going to overperform, and then he's going to fall apart when he gets back to me. Yeah. Whereas the IEE, she saw him for 2+ hours at a time over 3 different days. And he falls apart right around the 2-hour mark. So it was really important for someone to be with him for at least that long, and then to see him on multiple occasions, because you really can't act the same across all of those. And I think that's just such a big difference in terms of the quality of the evaluations. And that was my main disagreement with the school one, is it was so brief. She would never have a chance to see all the things that I'm seeing on a 6-hour school day.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions?
Anybody else? Let me just give a check. Yes, hold on. Oh, sorry. And still, let me finish Katie's thought. There was a second part to it. She said, speaking of post-COVID, I've noticed a change this year with schools giving a lot of pushback to families being non-compliant with IEPs and 504s. Have you noticed this? And has this been an intentional change? And then I'll get to Katie's question.
I have noticed a lot of it. I think districts are falling back on the reason being staffing. There's staffing shortages for support professionals, for, teachers. There's teachers with larger caseloads. There's kids that have a one-on-one written into their IEP and they can't staff the position. And for some reason, that's just okay. And so I've seen it. I want to think the best and say it's not intentional, but I think sometimes it can get neglectful, where maybe they have a reason and it's just forgotten about. And here we are 3 months later and nothing's been done. I just, keep bringing it to their attention. Keep having the meeting. If it's, it's your problem, it's your kid's problem, make it their problem too. Make it known that, this is going on, or this is supposed to be happening and this is not happening. Just like really over communicating that
Yeah,
would be
squeaky
my
wheel.
recommendation. Yeah.
A very, very squeaky wheel, like the worst shopping cart you've ever encountered. Thank you for that. Katie wants to know, it's a two-part question. So first part, what sort of testing is recommended for ADHD, especially in kids younger than 5 or younger kids, sorry, 5 years old?
So typically what anyone will do is they'll do the rating scales, which by itself, not super informative, but coupled with things like an observation, maybe they're doing I mean ADHD is, there's so many things within the umbrella of ADHD, but maybe they're looking at time on task or task initiation and doing an observation and collecting data on the student in whatever environment or across multiple environments. And then there are the like parent input forms that you can complete that would be included in the evaluation. Those are the 3 that I have seen off the top of my head. I would just make sure whatever they're doing that they're looking at, like I said before, looking at it from multiple angles, like not just doing the rating scales. That's so common because it's honestly, it's just the easiest thing to do is to send home these rating scales and have the parent complete it and then have 1 or 2 teachers complete it. But it's not necessarily giving the whole picture.
And so I was able to request a functional behavioral evaluation. It's especially tough for us as my son's in a virtual program. So they keep saying, well, we aren't seeing what you're seeing. And I'm saying, how would you see it? I am the only person with him all day long. Most of his learning is asynchronous. So come see it. I welcome you. Send someone here to see it. So someone said, well, why haven't you asked for an FBA? And I said, well, I don't even know what that means. So tell me. And it stands for functional behavioral, whatever, analysis. And so someone came, just like you said, and silently watched he and I get through a school day. And every time he sort of disengaged and his focus shifted, she would make, I don't know exactly what she did, but she'd sort of make note of it so that she was able to give like statistics of how often his attention shifted away, which I have to think helped our cause, because then it wasn't just me saying it. So would that be an example of something that Katie could ask for?
Yeah, if there's a specific behavior associated with ADHD. Again, ADHD is so broad, so without knowing specifics, it's tough for me to kind of give recommendations, but yes, that would be an option as well.
Okay, and the second part of her question, and can these be requested during the 60-day evaluation period if they weren't included initially?
Typically, no. If you're signing the form, you're agreeing to those assessments. I have seen some school psychologists include like their list of assessments and then say any other assessments deemed necessary, where like maybe they're doing some testing with a kid and they noticed, oh, well, they seem to be struggling with this. I want to give this other subset of something to further investigate that. It wouldn't hurt asking, but I don't think they're obligated to, because you already gave consent for the evaluation, and it depends how far into that 60-day window you are too. Yeah. Okay,
Katie, feel free to unmute if you want to. If you have a follow-up to that, if that didn't clarify it. Is there any sort of document, like one thing I wish I had done better from earlier on, and of course I would have if I knew how long the journey was going to be, I would have documented better, mainly just to save myself time of like going back through emails and finding dates and finding what I said. And I would have just created maybe one document and started logging, like on this day, I sent this to this person, and then just kind of go up from there, almost like a timeline of what happened. Is that something you recommend, or would you say it differently?
That's definitely something I would recommend. That's kind of what I do as an advocate. Like when I get a client, I go through all their documents and take notes, and then every interaction I have with anyone is documented in there. And then I can go back. It's helpful to say, this email was sent on this date. I requested this. I didn't get an answer. Then I requested it again on this date. And I feel like it depends on the person. I wish I had a perfect form for it, but depends on how you work too. But yeah, I would definitely recommend keeping track of all interactions, and anything said verbally in an in-person meeting or over the phone, follow up in writing. Send an email. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. We discussed this, and this. And just make sure it's put in writing.
I even heard someone go so far as to say, create an email account that's just for this, like, Jaden Desper IEP, whatever, so that you just it already is all in one place and you don't have to search. That's probably more than I ever would have done, but it's easier to think of it initially than it is to go back and try to try to do it later, for sure.
Definitely.
Awesome. Okay. Anybody else with last minute questions before we wrap up? I think this was super helpful. I'm hoping it will be for everybody else too. Anything else you thought of, Melissa, that you want to share before we go?
I don't think so. I will throw my contact information up there one more time. If anybody thinks of any questions or wants to reach out, feel free. There's my email, website, and phone number. My tech savvy husband showed me how to how to make a QR code with my contact info. So if you scan it, it just will pull up in your phone and you could add me as a contact and all the information's put in already. So.
Wonderful. Yeah. And of course, you can also find Melissa on our directory of parent recommended providers that have availability. And that's at specialneedscollective.com. We have a newsletter. So when you registered, you said whether you wanted to be added to it or not. So you'll get our twice a month newsletter. We're also offering community discovery calls via Zoom, and they're at no cost to families with someone with a background in early intervention, just to sort of help you figure out what your first step is or your next step, or connect with your best fit resources. So those are on our events calendar at specialneedscollective.com. And we're always taking suggestions. So if you've worked with a resource that you love that was really helpful, you can let us know about them. We'll see if we can get them added so that other parents can benefit too. So thank you, everybody, for coming. And thank you to Melissa so much for sharing your time. I know there's so much to say, but you kept it pretty, pretty concise. Yes. And if anyone needs to come find you, they can do that. And we'll be doing more of these on different topics. So just make sure that you are keeping an eye on us, and we'll let you know what's coming up next. And I can let you guys go and have a great night.
All right. Thank you so much, Erica.
Right. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.